The fence post cracked in half under Beatrice Kane's weight, sending her sprawling into the mud just as the storm clouds opened up above her ranch. And she knew this was the exact moment when she would either break completely or find a way to hold everything together for one more impossible day. She lay there for a moment, rain pelting her face, mixing with the frustrated tears she had been holding back since dawn. 2 years. 2 years since Thomas had been thrown from that wild stallion and broke his neck, leaving her alone with 800 acres of Colorado grassland, 70 head of cattle, and a mortgage that came due every 6 months like clockwork. The banker in Cannon City had stopped being sympathetic after the first year. Beatrice pushed herself up from the mud, her split skirt heavy with water and dirt. She was 26 years old and felt 60. Her hands were calloused and scarred from barbed wire, her back ached constantly from hauling feed and water, and her heart felt like something that had been trampled and left in the sun too long. But she stood up anyway, because that was what she did. Every single day she stood up. The cattle were lowing in the distance, probably huddled under the cottonwoods by the creek. She needed to check on them, needed to make sure none had wandered through the broken section of fence she had been trying to repair. The wood was rotted through in at least a dozen places, and she did not have the money to buy new posts or the strength to set them properly, even if she did. Thomas had always handled the heavy work, and she had managed the house, the garden, the chickens. They had been partners, complementary pieces of a whole. Now she was trying to be both halves and failing at everything. She trudged back toward the barn, her boots squelching with each step. The ranch house looked small and lonely against the vast Colorado landscape, with the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance like the edge of the world. It was April of 1882, and the spring rains were turning everything to mud. She had already lost 2 calves this season, drowned in a flash flood while she was on the other side of the property fixing a different section of fence. She could not be everywhere at once, no matter how hard she tried. As she approached the barn, she noticed a horse tied to her hitching post. A big bay gelding with good lines, well cared for. Her heart sank. If this was the banker coming to tell her she was out of time, she did not know what she would do. There was nowhere else to go. This ranch was all she had left of the life she and Thomas had built together. But the man who stepped out of her barn was not the banker. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water. He wore working clothes, a chambray shirt and canvas pants, both faded and mended but clean. His boots were worn but well maintained. She had seen him before, she realized. This was Grant Wallace, the cowboy who worked the ranch that bordered hers to the east. The Carmichael place, though old man Carmichael had died last winter and his son had taken over. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "saw your fence was down along the property line. Some of your cattle were wandering onto Carmichael land. I drove them back through and stacked some rocks to block the gap temporarily, but that fence needs proper repair." Beatrice felt her face flush with embarrassment and frustration. "I know it needs repair. I was working on the north pasture fence when it broke and threw me. I cannot be in 2 places at once." "No, madam," he agreed quietly. "Nobody can." There was no judgment in his voice, just a simple statement of fact, and somehow that made her feel even worse. She was failing, and everyone in the county knew it. The widow Kane, who was running her husband's ranch into the ground. "Thank you for returning the cattle," she said stiffly. "I will get to that fence as soon as I can." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Kane, I have been working for Jack Carmichael for 3 years now. Good steady work, but he runs a tight operation and does not need much help most days. I have spare time in the mornings and some evenings. I could come help with your fence work. No charge, just being neighborly." "I do not need charity," Beatrice said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. She had heard that offer before from various men in the area, and it always came with expectations she had no intention of meeting. A widow was vulnerable, and there were men who saw that as opportunity. Grant Wallace held up his hands, palms out. "Not charity, madam. I am offering to help with fence work, that is all. You need it done, and I have the time and the skill. Nothing more to it than that." "There is always more to it than that," she said tiredly. He met her eyes directly. "Not with me, there is not. My mother raised me to help neighbors when they need it. Your husband would have done the same for anyone else in the valley. I am just paying forward what this community gave to my family when we needed it." Beatrice wanted to refuse. She wanted to send him away and handle everything herself, because accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that she could not do this alone. But the truth was, she could not do this alone. She had been trying for 2 years, and the ranch was falling apart around her. Pride would not fix fences or pay the bank. "Fine," she said at last, "but I work alongside you. I am not some helpless woman who needs a man to solve all her problems." "Never thought you were," Grant said simply. "I will come by tomorrow morning around 6. We can start with that eastern fence line." He untied his horse and mounted up with the easy grace of a man who had spent his whole life in the saddle. "Get inside and get dry, Mrs. Kane. This storm is just getting started." He rode off before she could respond, disappearing into the rain. Beatrice stood there watching him go, feeling a complicated tangle of emotions she could not quite sort through. Relief, mostly. And fear, because letting someone help meant letting someone close, and she had built walls around herself these past 2 years. It was easier to be alone than to risk caring about someone and losing them again. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of weak coffee, and the ranch accounts spread before her. The numbers did not improve no matter how many times she added them up. She needed to sell at least 40 head this fall at top dollar just to make her mortgage payment and buy enough hay to get through the winter. And that was assuming nothing else went wrong, which in ranching was never a safe assumption. She thought about Grant Wallace's offer. It would save her time and effort, let her focus on other urgent repairs. But it also meant spending time with him, talking to him, letting him see just how badly things had deteriorated. That vulnerability made her uncomfortable. For 2 years, she had kept everyone at arm's length, working from dawn to dusk and falling into bed too exhausted to think. It was lonely, but it was safe. The wind howled around the corners of the house, and she shivered despite the fire crackling in the stove. This had been her and Thomas's dream, this ranch. They had married young, both 19, and worked like dogs to save enough money to buy this land. 5 years they had been married, 5 happy years, and then one moment of bad luck with a spooked horse had taken it all away. She still woke up sometimes reaching for him, still turned to tell him something before remembering he was not there. She closed the account book and went to bed, but sleep was long in coming. Rain drummed on the roof, and she listened to it, thinking about fence posts and cattle and the cowboy with creek water eyes who had offered help for nothing in return. Grant arrived the next morning precisely at 6, just as the sun was breaking over the eastern hills. Beatrice was already up, had been up since 4:30, feeding the chickens and the 2 horses she kept for ranch work. She had changed into her sturdiest work dress and braided her dark hair tightly against her head. She was determined to prove she could hold her own. "Morning," Grant said as he dismounted. He had brought tools with him, she noticed. A post-hole digger, a hammer, a bag of nails, coils of wire. I figured we could start at the worst section and work our way along. How much footage are we looking at? About a quarter-mile on the east line, Beatrice said, and another half-mile on the north pasture, and the south boundary has at least 3 spots that need work. Grant whistled low. That is a lot of fence. I know. She felt defensive again, waiting for him to say she had let things go too far, that she should have kept up with it. But he just nodded. We had better get started then. You have fresh posts, or do we need to cut some? There are about 24 in the barn that Thomas cut before he died, she said. I have been rationing them, using them for the worst breaks. They walked out to the east fence line together, and Grant assessed the damage with a practiced eye. This whole section needs to be replaced, he said. The posts are rotted at ground level. You have been nailing new wire to bad wood, and that is why it keeps failing. I know that, Beatrice said, frustration leaking into her voice. But I do not have the money for new posts, and I cannot cut and cure them fast enough to keep up with the breaks. My boss has timber on his land, Grant said. I could talk to him, see if you could cut some there in exchange for work. You have skills he could use. I can cook, so do laundry, Beatrice said. I used to help at the church socials, cooking for 50 or more. Jack Carmichael is a widower with 2 young daughters, Grant said. His sister comes by to cook sometimes, but she has her own family. I bet he would trade timber for some home-cooked meals brought over once a week or so. He is tired of my cooking, and the girls would enjoy a woman's touch. It was a practical solution, the kind of barter arrangement that was common out here where cash money was scarce. Beatrice felt her pride warring with her desperation. I will think about it, she said finally. They worked through the morning, and Beatrice had to admit that Grant knew what he was doing. He set posts with efficient movements, tamping the earth firm around each one, stringing wire at exactly the right tension. She worked beside him, holding posts steady, cutting wire to length, stapling it in place. It was hard physical labor, and by midday her shoulders were screaming and her hands were raw despite her gloves. We should take a break, Grant said, straightening up and wiping sweat from his forehead. You have water at the house, Beatrice said. Come on. She led him back to the ranch house, acutely aware of how small and shabby it must look to him. The paint was peeling, one of the porch steps was loose, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. She had been so focused on keeping the ranch functioning that the house had been neglected, but Grant did not comment on any of that. He just waited while she pumped water from the well and filled 2 tin cups. They sat on the porch steps in the shade, drinking in silence. A meadowlark sang somewhere in the distance, and the breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. You have good land here, Grant said eventually. Good water, decent grass. With some work, this could be a thriving operation again. With a lot of work, Beatrice corrected. And money I do not have. Most folks out here are making do with what they have, Grant said. It is not about having money, it is about having neighbors willing to help each other. That is how communities survive. Why are you really doing this? Beatrice asked, turning to look at him. What do you get out of spending your free time fixing my fences? Grant was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the mountains in the distance. My pa died when I was 12, he said finally. Logging accident up in Wyoming territory. My ma tried to hold our homestead together, but she could not do it alone. She was too proud to ask for help, and people did not offer much because they figured she would just give up and move back east. We lost the place. Ended up moving from town to town while she took in washing and sewing. She died when I was 16, worn out and broken. He looked at Beatrice then, and she saw old pain in his eyes. I do not want to see that happen to someone else. You are trying, Mrs. Kane. You are working yourself to the bone trying to hold onto this place. Maybe if someone gives you a hand, you will make it. and maybe that balances out the help my mother never got." Beatrice felt her throat tighten. She understood loss, understood the way it could shape you, leave you with edges that never quite smoothed out. "I am sorry about your mother," she said quietly. "Me too," Grant said. "But that is why I am here. Just offering a hand to a neighbor, nothing more complicated than that." They finished their water and went back to work. By the time the sun was starting to sink toward the western peaks, they had repaired nearly 200 feet of fence. It was solid work, the posts set deep and true, the wire stretched tight. Beatrice felt something ease in her chest, a tiny bit of the crushing weight lifting. It was not much, but it was progress. "I will come back tomorrow," Grant said as he gathered his tools. "We can finish this section and start on the north pasture." "You are working for Mr. Carmichael tomorrow," Beatrice said. "In the afternoon," Grant said. "Mornings are still free." "I will be here at 6. He rode off into the gathering dusk, and Beatrice stood watching him go, that same complicated feeling stirring in her chest. She was not sure she liked depending on someone, even for something as simple as fence repair. But she could not deny that it felt good to have help, to not be carrying everything alone. Over the next 2 weeks, Grant came every morning. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side with few words but comfortable silence. Beatrice learned that he was 28, had worked ranches all over Colorado and Wyoming, and was saving money to buy his own place someday. He had a dry sense of humor that surfaced occasionally, usually when something went wrong, and he never complained even when the work was backbreaking. She also learned that he was a man of his word. He had spoken to Jack Carmichael, and a deal had been struck. Beatrice would cook a large meal twice a week and bring it over to the Carmichael ranch, and in exchange, she could cut timber from his woodlot for fence posts. It was a fair arrangement, and it solved one of her biggest problems. But spending time with Grant was creating a different kind of problem. Beatrice found herself looking forward to his arrival each morning, found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with fence work. The way he treated his horse with casual affection, the careful way he handled tools, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She caught herself watching him sometimes, and had to remind herself that she was a widow, that she had no business thinking about another man that way. Thomas had been dead for 2 years, but it felt like a betrayal to notice someone else, to feel something stir in her chest that was not grief. She tried to push it away, to focus on the work, but it was getting harder. One morning in early May, Grant arrived with news. "Carmichael wants to know if you would be interested in working his cattle drive to Denver next month. He is short a hand, and he knows you can ride and rope. The pay is $40. $40. That would buy feed for the winter, maybe even a few head of cattle to build her herd back up. But it would mean being away from her ranch for nearly 2 weeks, leaving everything unattended." "I cannot leave this place for that long," Beatrice said. "Too much could go wrong." "I will check on it," Grant offered. "Feed your chickens, make sure your horses are cared for. Jack can spare me for quick rides over here each evening." "Why would you do that?" Beatrice asked. Grant looked at her steadily. "Because you need that money, and this is a good opportunity, and because I am your neighbor, and that is what neighbors do." Beatrice wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence, but she also knew he was right. She needed that money desperately. "All right," she said finally. "Tell Mr. Carmichael I will go." The cattle drive was hard work, but Beatrice had grown up around cattle and knew how to handle them. Jack Carmichael was a fair boss, and the other hands treated her with respect once they saw she could do the work. They pushed 200 head to the stockyards in Denver, sold them for good prices, and made it back to Cannon City by the end of June. Beatrice returned to her ranch to find everything in order. The chickens were fat and healthy, her horses had been brushed and exercised, and Grant had even mucked out the stalls and stacked fresh hay in the barn. She found a note tacked to her door. "Welcome back. Coffee tomorrow morning." She smiled despite herself. The next morning she made a fresh pot of coffee and set out 2 cups. Grant arrived at dawn, as always, and they sat on her porch watching the sun come up over the grasslands. "Thank you for taking care of everything," Beatrice said. "I was worried the whole time." "Everything was fine," Grant said. "Your ranch is in better shape than you think, Mrs. Kane. You have done good work holding it together." "I could not have done it without your help," Beatrice admitted. "The fences, the arrangement with Mr. Carmichael, convincing me to go on that drive. You have given me a chance to make this work." Grant was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "All right." "Why are you so determined to keep this place? It would be easier to sell, move to town, find work that does not break your back every day." Beatrice looked out at her land, the rolling grassland dotted with cattle, the mountains rising beyond. "This was Thomas's and my dream," she said softly. "We built this together, every fence post and every head of cattle. When he died, everyone expected me to give up and sell. Even his family told me I should go back east, find some clerk to marry and live a normal life. But this is not just Thomas's dream anymore. It is mine too. I am not going to let it go just because it is hard. He would not have, and neither will I." "That takes courage," Grant said. "Or stubbornness," Beatrice said with a small smile. "I am not always sure which." "Maybe they are the same thing sometimes," Grant said. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, and then Grant stood. "I should get to Carmichael's place. But Beatrice, there is something I want to say." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent a little jolt through her. "What is it?" He looked uncomfortable, like a man trying to find the right words. "I know you have been on your own for 2 years, and I know you are not looking for anything from anyone. But I want you to know that I am not just helping you to be neighborly anymore. I am helping because I care about you. Because somewhere along the way, while we were fixing fences and working cattle, I started to have feelings for you that are more than just friendly." Beatrice felt her heart start to pound. "Grant, I am not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted to be honest. I will keep helping with the ranch work if you want me to, and I will not bring this up again if you do not want me to, but I think you should know where I stand." He walked to his horse and mounted up, clearly not expecting a response. Beatrice watched him ride away, her thoughts in turmoil. She had been so careful not to think about this, not to acknowledge what had been growing between them. But now it was out in the open, and she could not ignore it anymore. The truth was, she had feelings for Grant too. She had been fighting them for weeks, telling herself it was too soon, that she was betraying Thomas's memory, that she was just lonely and mistaking gratitude for something more. But it was not gratitude. It was the way her heart lifted when she saw him riding up in the mornings. It was the way she felt safe when he was nearby, like she did not have to carry everything alone. It was the way she caught herself imagining a future that included him. But she had been Thomas's wife. She had loved him deeply, completely. How could she move on to someone else? How could she let herself care about another man when she had sworn at Thomas's grave that she would never forget him, never stop loving him? She spent the day working mechanically through her chores, her mind circling endlessly around Grant's words. By evening, she was exhausted and confused and frustrated with herself. She made a simple dinner and sat at the kitchen table, pushing food around her plate without eating much. There was a knock at her door just as the sun was setting. Beatrice opened it to find Jack Carmichael standing on her porch, hat in hand. "Mrs. Kane," he said, "I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to talk to you about something." "Of course, Mr. Carmichael, come in." He stepped inside but declined her offer of coffee. I will not take up much of your time. I came to talk to you about Grant Wallace. Beatrice felt her face flush. What about him? He is a good man, Jack said. Best hand I have ever had, honest and hard-working. He has been working for me for 3 years, saving every penny to buy his own place someday. But I have noticed he has been spending a lot of time over here helping you, and I wanted to make sure his intentions are honorable. Mr. Carmichael, I appreciate your concern, but I can take care of myself, Beatrice said stiffly. I know you can, Jack said, but Grant is like a younger brother to me, and I care about what happens to him. And I also know what folks in town are starting to say, seeing him coming and going from your place every morning. I do not want either of you hurt by gossip. Beatrice had not thought about that, but of course people would talk. A widow and a single man spending time alone together. In a small town like Cannon City, that was enough to start rumors. We have just been working on fences, she said. Nothing inappropriate has happened. I believe you, Jack said, but what I came here to say is this. If Grant's intentions toward you are serious, and if you return those feelings, you have my blessing and my support. He is a good man, and you deserve happiness. But if there is nothing between you except neighborly help, then maybe it is time for him to step back, for both your sakes. After Jack left, Beatrice sat in her dark kitchen for a long time. She could not keep going like this, caught between the past and the possibility of a future. She had to make a decision, had to be honest with herself about what she wanted. The truth was, she did care about Grant. More than she had wanted to admit, and she thought maybe Thomas would understand that. He had loved her fiercely, and he would have wanted her to be happy, not to spend the rest of her life alone out of loyalty to a memory. Loving someone new did not erase what she and Thomas had shared. It was just a different chapter, a new beginning. She did not sleep much that night, but by morning she knew what she needed to say. Grant arrived at 6, the same as always. He was more reserved than usual, clearly unsure of where things stood between them after his confession the day before. They worked for a couple of hours in near silence, repairing a section of fence on the north pasture. Finally, Beatrice could not stand it anymore. Grant, stop for a minute. I need to talk to you. He set down his tools and turned to face her, his expression guarded. All right. Beatrice took a deep breath. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was to hold onto this ranch and survive each day. I was not looking for anything else, was not looking for anyone. And then you showed up and started fixing my fences, and I was so angry because I did not want to need help. I did not want to depend on anyone. Beatrice, you do not have to. Please let me finish, she said. These past few months, working with you, I have felt something I did not think I would feel again. Hope. And more than that. I care about you, Grant. I have been fighting it because I felt guilty, like I was betraying Thomas. But I do not think he would want me to be alone forever. I think he would want me to be happy. Grant took a step toward her. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying I have feelings for you too, Beatrice said, her voice shaking slightly. And I am scared, because I already lost one person I loved, and I do not know if I can survive that again. But I also know that I do not want to keep living half a life out of fear. Grant closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. His palms were calloused and warm, and Beatrice felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like coming home. I cannot promise nothing bad will ever happen, Grant said quietly. Life is uncertain, especially out here. But I can promise that I will be here, that I will work beside you and support you and care for you for as long as you will have me. You are the strongest, most determined woman I have ever met, and I would be honored if you would give me a chance. I am giving you a chance, Beatrice said. I am giving us a chance. He smiled then, a real full smile that lit up his whole face, and he pulled her into his arms. Beatrice rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt something she had not felt in 2 years. Peace. They did not rush into anything. Grant continued to work for Jack Carmichael, and he still came to help Beatrice in the mornings, but now there was a new understanding between them. He stayed for dinner sometimes, and they would sit on her porch in the evenings talking about their dreams and plans. He told her about his childhood in Wyoming, about his father's death and his mother's struggle. She told him about meeting Thomas at a church social, about how they had worked together to build the ranch, about how much it had hurt to lose him. "I will never try to replace him," Grant said one evening. "He was your husband and you loved him. That is part of who you are, and I would never ask you to forget that." "Thank you," Beatrice said softly, "but I am learning that loving someone new does not mean forgetting the past. It just means making room for the future too." By late summer, it was clear to everyone in the valley that Beatrice Kane and Grant Wallace were courting. Some people approved, happy to see the widow finding happiness again. Others were more judgmental, thinking 2 years was not enough time to mourn. But Beatrice found she did not care much what people thought. She had spent 2 years proving she could survive on her own. Now she was choosing to build something new. Grant proposed in September, on a cool evening when the aspen leaves were turning gold in the mountains. They were sitting on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, when he turned to her and took her hand. "Beatrice, I know we have not been courting long by some people's standards, but I have known since the day I met you that you were someone special. I love you. I love your strength and your determination and your kindness. I want to build a life with you, work this ranch together, maybe raise a family if we are blessed that way. Will you marry me?" Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in October of 1882, in a simple ceremony at the church in Cannon City. Jack Carmichael stood up as best man, and Jack's sister Emma acted as Beatrice's attendant. It was a small gathering, just close friends and neighbors, but it felt right. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Grant wore his best suit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Grant kissed her for the first time as her husband, Beatrice felt like she was starting a whole new chapter of her life. Grant moved into the ranch house, and they became partners in every sense of the word. He handled the heavy labor and the cattle, while she managed the finances and the household. But they also worked side by side on many tasks, just as she and Thomas had done. It was different, though. Grant had different strengths, different ways of approaching problems. Together, they made a strong team. That winter was hard, as Colorado winters always were, but they faced it together. They spent long evenings by the fire, Grant teaching her to play chess while she mended shirts and socks. They talked about expanding the herd in the spring, about maybe building a new barn and fixing up the house. They made plans and dreamed together, and Beatrice found herself happier than she had been in years. In the spring of 1883, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous about telling Grant, worried about how he would react, but he was overjoyed. He became even more protective of her, insisting she not do any heavy work, though she ignored him most of the time and kept working as she always had. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him when he tried to stop her from mucking out the barn. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years." "Not my wife," Grant said firmly. "You are carrying our child, and I am not taking any chances." It was sweet, even if it was a bit overbearing. Beatrice let him fuss over her, because she knew it came from love. Their son was born in November of 1883, a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. They named him Thomas Grant Wallace, honoring both the past and the present. Beatrice cried when she held him for the first time, overwhelmed with love and gratitude and a bittersweet ache for the husband who had never gotten to be a father. Grant was a natural with the baby, holding him confidently and walking the floor with him when he cried at night. "My ma had 3 babies after me," he explained. "I learned to change nappies before I could ride a horse." Watching Grant with their son, Beatrice felt her heart swell with love. This was her family now, this was her future. And while she would always carry Thomas in a corner of her heart, she was fully present in this new life she had built. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Grant's knowledge and hard work, combined with Beatrice's careful management of their finances, turned the struggling operation into a thriving one. They paid off the mortgage in 1885, and by 1886 they had built a new barn and added a room onto the house. They hired a young hand to help with the cattle, and Beatrice started raising chickens and selling eggs in town. In 1886, Beatrice gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Ella Wallace. She was a beautiful baby with her mother's dark hair and her father's creek water eyes. Tom, as they called their son, was nearly 3 by then and fascinated by his baby sister. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Grant and Beatrice worked the ranch together, raised their children, and built a good life in the Colorado grasslands. They faced challenges, of course. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, all the normal struggles of ranching life. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. One evening in the summer of 1887, they were sitting on their porch after the children were asleep, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Grant reached over and took Beatrice's hand. "You ever regret saying yes to me?" he asked. Beatrice looked at him in surprise. "Never." "Why would you ask that?" "Just making sure," Grant said with a small smile. "Sometimes I still cannot believe you chose me. You could have had your pick of men." "I did not want my pick of men," Beatrice said. "I wanted you, and I have never regretted it for a single moment." She leaned over and kissed him, and he pulled her close. They sat there together as the sky darkened and the coyotes began their nightly chorus. 2 people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. By 1888, the ranch was one of the most successful operations in the Cannon City area. They ran nearly 300 head of cattle now, and Grant had bought the quarter section adjacent to their property, expanding their grazing land. They had built a new house, bigger and sturdier, with a real wood floor and glass windows. It was not fancy, but it was comfortable and solid, a far cry from the shabby place Beatrice had been struggling to maintain 6 years earlier. Tom was 5 now, and Grace was 2. They were healthy, happy children who ran wild on the ranch under the watchful eyes of their parents. Tom was already learning to ride, following his father around like a shadow, and Grace was fearless, constantly getting into things she should not. Jack Carmichael had become a close friend, almost like family. His daughters were older now, and they sometimes came to play with Tom and Grace. The community that had once held Beatrice at arm's length now fully accepted her and Grant as part of the fabric of the valley. One afternoon in late summer, Beatrice was working in her garden when she heard a familiar sound. Riders approaching fast. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 3 horses coming up the road at a gallop. Her heart jumped into her throat. Fast riders usually meant trouble. Grant came running from the barn, and they both stood watching as the riders approached. Beatrice recognized one of them as Bill Henderson, a rancher from 10 miles south. He pulled up his lathered horse and jumped down. "Grant, we need help. There is a range fire started by lightning spreading fast. It is heading toward the Simmons place, and they have got 3 little kids. We are gathering everyone we can to cut a fire break." "I will get my gear," Grant said immediately. He turned to Beatrice. "Keep the kids close. If the wind shifts, that fire could come this way." "I will watch for it," Beatrice promised. "Be careful." Grant kissed her quickly and ran to saddle his horse. Within minutes he was riding off with the other men, and Beatrice was left with the fear gnawing at her gut. Range fires were deadly. She had seen the results of 1 year ago. Acres of blackened grassland and dead cattle, and one rancher who had not made it out. She gathered the children and kept them inside the house, watching the southern horizon for smoke. By evening she could see it, a dark smudge against the sky. The wind was blowing from the south, and if it did not shift, the fire would miss their ranch. But Grant was down there, fighting it. He came home near midnight, exhausted and covered in soot. Beatrice had been waiting up, unable to sleep. She helped him wash up and made him eat something, though he was almost too tired to chew. "Is everyone all right?" she asked. "Yeah," Grant said. "We got the Simmons family out, and we managed to cut a break wide enough to stop the fire from spreading further. Lost about 1,000 acres of grass and some cattle, but no people. It could have been worse." Beatrice held him tight, relief flooding through her. This was the reality of their life out here. There was always danger, always risk. But they faced it together, and they supported their neighbors through hard times, just as their neighbors supported them. In 1889, Beatrice gave birth to their third child, another son they named Daniel Robert Wallace. He was a big baby, over 9 pounds, and the birth was difficult. For a few scary hours, the doctor was worried about Beatrice, but she was strong and she came through it. Grant stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and talking to her, and she drew strength from his presence. "We have 3 healthy children," she said when it was over, holding baby Daniel in her arms. "We are blessed." "We are," Grant agreed, but his face was pale. "But no more, Beatrice. I cannot lose you. 3 is enough." She was too tired to argue, and in truth she agreed. 3 children was a good-sized family, and she was 33 years old now, not a young woman anymore. They had been given so much, more than she had ever dreamed possible during those dark days after Thomas died. The 1890s brought more prosperity and also more challenges. There was a drought in 1890 that tested everyone's resolve, and cattle prices dropped in 1893 during the financial panic. But Grant and Beatrice had learned to be cautious, to save money in good years to carry them through bad ones. They weathered the hard times and celebrated the good ones. Their children grew. Tom became a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to be a cattleman like his father. Grace was spirited and independent, always asking questions and challenging the rules. Daniel was the peacemaker, sweet-natured and easygoing, keeping his older siblings from killing each other. Grant proved to be a wonderful father, patient and kind but firm when necessary. He taught Tom and Daniel to ride and rope, to read the weather and the cattle, to be good stewards of the land. He encouraged Grace's independence, much to the disapproval of some of the more traditional folks in town, teaching her to ride and rope just like her brothers. She should be learning to cook and sew, one of the church ladies told Beatrice disapprovingly. Not running around like a wild boy. "She is learning those things too," Beatrice said mildly. "But there is no reason she cannot also learn ranch skills. This will be her land someday, same as her brothers. She should know how to run it." Beatrice and Grant had become pillars of the community. They helped organize barn raisings and church socials, took in a young orphan girl one winter and found her a good home with a childless couple, donated beef to families who were struggling. They lived their values, believing in hard work and fair dealing and helping those who needed it. One evening in 1895, They were sitting on their porch as they often did, watching the sun set over their land. The children were playing in the yard, Tom at 12 tall and lanky, Grace at 9 all flying braids and laughter, Daniel at 6 still chubby-cheeked and innocent. Grant had his arm around Beatrice and she was leaning into him, content. "You remember the first time I came here?" Grant asked. 13 years ago. You were so angry that I was offering help." Beatrice laughed. "I was terrified, not angry. Terrified of failing, terrified of depending on anyone, terrified of feeling something for you." "But you did feel something for me," Grant said with a grin. "Eventually," Beatrice teased, "you grew on me." He laughed and pulled her closer. "I love you, Beatrice Wallace. More now than I did the day I married you, and I loved you a lot then." "I love you too," Beatrice said, turning to kiss him. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing something in me worth fighting for." "You have always been worth fighting for," Grant said seriously. "You are the strongest person I know. You just needed someone to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but right beside you as an equal partner. That is all I have ever tried to be." "You are exactly that," Beatrice said. "My partner, my love, my best friend." They sat there together as the sky turned purple and then black, as the stars came out one by one, and the children's laughter gradually faded as they tired themselves out. This was their life, the one they had built together from pain and loss and determination. It was not perfect, but it was real and solid and good. The years continued to roll by. Tom grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch work. He had his father's steady temperament and his mother's keen mind for numbers and planning. At 18, he started courting the eldest daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible girl named Mary who loved the land as much as he did. Grace at 15 was a handful, always pushing boundaries and questioning rules. She talked about going to Denver to study, about becoming a teacher or maybe even a doctor. Grant and Beatrice encouraged her dreams, even though they knew it would be hard to let her go when the time came. Daniel at 12 was still the peacemaker, sensitive and thoughtful, spending hours reading when he could and dreaming of traveling to see the world beyond Colorado. Beatrice thought maybe he would not stay on the ranch, and that was all right too. They had raised their children to think for themselves, to follow their hearts. In 1898, the United States went to war with Spain, and there was talk of volunteers needed. Tom wanted to go, fired up with patriotic fever, but Grant talked him out of it. "This ranch is your duty," Grant told his son. "Your mother and I are getting older and we need you here. There are plenty of other young men who can go fight. Your fight is here, keeping this place running and taking care of your family." Tom was disappointed, but he listened, and Beatrice was grateful. She could not bear the thought of her oldest child going off to war. The new century arrived, and with it came changes. The Wild West they had known was slowly being tamed. There were more towns, more railroads, more settlers. The open range was giving way to fenced pastures. Cattle rustling and range wars were less common. Life was becoming more civilized, more orderly. In 1901, Tom married Mary in a big wedding that brought together half the county. Beatrice cried happy tears, watching her son pledge his life to the young woman he loved. Grant stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and they both felt the bittersweet joy of seeing their child start his own family. Tom and Mary moved into a house Grant and Beatrice built for them on the far end of the ranch. It was time to start passing things on to the next generation. Time to step back a little and let the young people take the lead. Grace did go to Denver in 1902, enrolling in a women's college to study literature and history. She came home for holidays full of new ideas and passionate opinions, driving her parents crazy and making them proud in equal measure. She would find her own path, they knew, something beyond ranching and Cannon City. Daniel at 18 surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to go into the ministry. He had a quiet faith that ran deep and a calling to serve. Beatrice had not seen it coming, but once he said it, it made perfect sense. Her youngest child would not be a rancher or a scholar, but a shepherd of souls. In 1903, Grant and Beatrice became grandparents when Mary gave birth to a baby girl. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Beatrice felt the circle complete. She was 47 years old now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her hands permanently scarred from decades of hard work. But she was happy, surrounded by family and love. Grant at 49 was still strong and capable, though he let Tom handle more of the heavy ranch work now. His hair was gray at the temples, and he moved a little slower in the mornings, but he was healthy and content. They had built something lasting together, something that would continue long after they were gone. One spring evening in 1905, Beatrice walked out to the old fence line, the eastern boundary where Grant had first started helping her 23 years earlier. The posts he had set then were still standing, weathered but solid. She ran her hand over one of them, remembering that young woman she had been, so desperate and afraid and determined not to show it. She had come so far since then. Grant found her there, as she had known he would. He always seemed to know when she needed him, even after all these years. "Thinking about old times?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Thinking about how far we have come," Beatrice said. 23 years ago, I was ready to give up. I was holding on by my fingernails, too proud to ask for help and too scared to accept it when it was offered. And then you showed up and changed everything." "You changed everything," Grant corrected. "You had the courage to let someone in, to trust again after you had lost so much. That takes more strength than anything I ever did." "We did it together," Beatrice said. "Everything we have, we built it together. The ranch, our family, our life. None of it would exist without both of us." Grant pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horse and leather and sage. They stood there together as the sun set and the first stars appeared. Two people who had found each other against the odds and made a life that mattered. Tom and Mary would take over the ranch eventually, would raise their children here and pass it on to the next generation. Grace would make her mark in the world in her own way, teaching and inspiring others. Daniel would serve his congregation and bring comfort to those who needed it. The legacy Grant and Beatrice had built would continue long after they were gone, echoing through the generations. But for now, in this moment, they were simply together. Two people who had survived loss and hardship and built something beautiful from the ashes of grief. They had been given a second chance at love, and they had seized it with both hands. "I love you," Beatrice said softly. "I love you too," Grant replied. "Always have, always will." They walked back to the house together hand in hand, past the barn Grant had built and the garden Beatrice tended, toward the warm light spilling from the windows. Inside was their home, filled with memories and love and the promise of tomorrow. They had started with broken fences and broken hearts, and they had built a life that was whole and strong and enduring. And that, Beatrice thought as Grant opened the door for her, was the greatest gift of all. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Beatrice and Grant settled into the comfortable routines of grandparents, watching their family grow and flourish around them. By 1907, Tom and Mary had given them 3 grandchildren, 2 boys and a girl, all healthy and lively. Grace had married a schoolteacher she met in Denver, a kind man who supported her dreams, and they had settled in Colorado Springs, where Grace taught at a girls' school. Daniel had finished his seminary training and taken a position at a small church in Salida, where he was beloved by his congregation. The ranch continued to prosper under Tom's management. He had inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's business sense, and he was already making improvements and expanding the operation. Grant and Beatrice had officially signed over ownership of the ranch to Tom in 1906, though they continued to live in the main house and help where they could. Beatrice found herself with time for pursuits she had never been able to indulge in during those hard early years. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society at church, helped organize the annual county fair, and even took up painting watercolors. Grant spent his days working with the horses, training young stock and teaching his grandsons to ride. They took trips to Denver and Colorado Springs to visit their scattered children, marveling at how much the world had changed since they were young. In the summer of 1910, the whole family gathered at the ranch to celebrate Grant and Beatrice's 28th wedding anniversary. All three of their children came with their families, filling the house with noise and laughter. They held a big barbecue, inviting neighbors and friends from all over the valley. As the sun set and the musicians struck up a tune, Grant led Beatrice out for a dance. 28 years, he said as they swayed to the music. Sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. I know what you mean, Beatrice said. I can still remember the first time you showed up at my door, offering to fix my fences. I was so suspicious of you. You were terrifying, Grant said with a laugh. Standing there covered in mud and glaring at me like I was the enemy, I almost rode away and never came back. What made you stay? Beatrice asked, though she had heard the story before. She never tired of hearing it. Your eyes, Grant said simply. They were full of pain and determination and fire. I thought, here is someone worth knowing, someone worth fighting for, and I was right. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends and neighbors who had become like family. This was the life they had built together, rich in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with love and connection and purpose. In 1912, Beatrice's health began to decline. She was 56 years old, and the hard years of ranch work were catching up with her. Her joints ached, especially in cold weather, and she tired easily. The doctor in Cannon City told her it was just age, that she needed to slow down and rest more, but Beatrice had never been good at resting. Grant fussed over her constantly, insisting she stay in bed when she was feeling poorly, bringing her tea and books and sitting with her for hours. Their children took turns visiting, making sure she was cared for. Beatrice bore it all with as much grace as she could muster, though privately she chafed at being dependent again after so many years of strength. One evening in early spring of 1913, Grant sat beside her bed holding her hand. She had been feeling worse lately, her breathing labored, her energy gone. The doctor had been frank with Grant. Her heart was giving out. She might have months or she might have days. There was nothing to be done except keep her comfortable. I need you to promise me something, Beatrice said, her voice weak but clear. Anything, Grant said. Promise me you will not stop living when I am gone. You will keep working with the horses, keep visiting the children, keep being part of this community. Do not lock yourself away in grief the way I did after Thomas died. Promise me. Beatrice, I cannot think about that right now, Grant said, his voice breaking. You have to, she insisted. I need to know you will be all right. We have had 28 wonderful years together, and I am grateful for every single day. But you will still have time left when I am gone, and I want you to use it. Live fully, love the people around you, be present in the world. Promise me. I promise, Grant said, tears streaming down his face. But you are not leaving yet. You are too stubborn. Beatrice smiled. "I am pretty stubborn, but Grant, when the time comes, do not be sad for too long. Remember the good times, the laughter and the love and everything we built together. That is what matters." She did hold on longer than the doctor expected, making it through the spring and into the summer. Her children were all able to come say goodbye, to tell her they loved her, to thank her for everything she had given them. Her grandchildren filled her room with wildflowers and told her stories, making her laugh even through the pain. On a warm evening in July, with Grant holding her hand and their children gathered around, Beatrice Kane Wallace passed away peacefully. She was 57 years old, and she had lived a full life, one marked by loss and love, struggle and triumph, grief and joy. Grant was devastated, but he kept his promise. He mourned her deeply, but he did not lock himself away. He continued working with the horses, continued visiting his children and grandchildren, continued being part of the community they had built together. He told stories about Beatrice to anyone who would listen, keeping her memory alive. He lived for 7 more years, long enough to see more grandchildren born, to see Tom make the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the state, to see Grace publish a book of essays about women's education, to see Daniel become a respected voice for compassion and justice. He was content, grateful for the years he had been given with Beatrice, at peace with the life they had built together. When Grant died in 1920 at the age of 66, he was buried beside Beatrice in the little cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. Their children stood at the graveside with their families, saying goodbye to the man who had loved them and guided them and taught them how to live with integrity and purpose. Tom Wallace stood looking out over the ranch that afternoon, thinking about everything his parents had built. His mother had arrived here as a young widow, desperate and alone, fighting to hold on to the land that was all she had left. His father had offered her help with no expectations, just simple neighborly kindness. And from that beginning had come all of this. A thriving ranch, a large and loving family, a legacy that would continue for generations. He thought about the lessons they had taught him, not just about ranching but about life. Work hard but do not forget to love. Be strong but do not be afraid to ask for help. Honor the past but do not live in it. Build something that matters. Leave the world better than you found it. He looked at his own children, playing in the grass with their cousins, and he knew that his parents' legacy would live on through them. They would tell their children about the widow who would not give up and the cowboy who helped her, about the love that grew from kindness and respect, about the life they built together in the wild Colorado grasslands. The story would be passed down through the generations, changing slightly with each telling but maintaining its essential truth. That love could grow from the ashes of loss. That 2 people working together could build something lasting. That kindness and courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. And every spring, when the grass turned green and the wildflowers bloomed across the ranch, the descendants of Beatrice and Grant would remember the story of how it all began. With a broken fence, a desperate widow, and a cowboy who offered help and found love. The ranch remained in the Wallace family for over 100 years, each generation adding to what came before, while honoring the legacy of those who started it all. The original fence line that Grant had repaired that first summer was preserved, the old posts replaced with monuments that marked where 2 lives had intersected and changed each other forever. Beatrice had been right that day when she stood at Thomas's grave and vowed to hold onto the ranch no matter what it took. She had been strong enough to survive alone, but she had also been brave enough to let someone in, to risk her heart again, to build a new life without forgetting the old one. And that courage had made all the difference. Grant had been right too. when he saw past the mud and the glare and the defensive walls to the woman underneath. He had recognized strength and determination and worth, and he had offered his hand in partnership. Not to save her because she did not need saving, just to stand beside her and work together toward something bigger than either of them alone. That was the real story, the one that mattered. Not just a romance, though there had been deep and lasting love. Not just a tale of the Old West, though it was that too, but a story about resilience and community and the power of two people choosing each other every day through all the challenges and joys life brought. The sun set over the Colorado grasslands, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, just as it had for countless evenings before and would for countless evenings to come. The land remained, enduring and beautiful, witness to all the lives that had unfolded upon it. And somewhere in that vast landscape, the spirits of a widow and a cowboy smiled, content in the knowledge that what they had built together would last long after they were gone. Their love story had begun with broken fences and ended with a legacy that spanned generations. It was a testament to the truth that the best relationships are not about one person rescuing another, but about two people choosing to build something together. About respect and partnership, and the quiet, steady kind of love that grows deeper with each passing year. And so the story ended where it began, at a ranch in Cannon City, Colorado, where the grass grew green and the cattle grazed peacefully, and the mountains stood eternal against the sky. Where a widow had once struggled alone, and a cowboy had offered help, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. Their story was finished, but their legacy lived on, a reminder that even from the ashes of loss and grief, new life and new love can grow, strong and true and enduring as the land itself.